Okay, with everything that's going on nowadays, let's talk about how dependent or independent we might think we are from our government. It is an unhappy reality that it often takes massive and devastating economic interruptions in order to get people to think about doing things they ought to have been doing all along. It is a sad commentary on humanity that it often takes the fear of a second Great Depression to motivate people to learn the lessons of the first Great Depression. It is a sign of the human condition that most people, most of the time, will not do that which seems uncomfortable for them in the short run, even if it means that doing so will spare them the unbearable in the long run. Let's talk a little bit about the 80-20 rule, which means 20% of the people do 80% of the work, while 80% of the people do 20% of the work, or 20% of the people are producers, while 80% of the people are consumers, and finally, 20% of the people provide 80% of the benefits that sustain society, while 80% of the people provide 20% of the benefits. Which means 80% of the people are victims just waiting to happen, while 20% of the people are rarely victims because they are intelligent, engaged, aware, and responsive. In reality, most of the people you know, if examined in a historical context, are not now viable or sustainable, meaning that they would not survive even a short amount of time after a systemic failure of the JIT, or just-in-time, industrial consumer life support grid that is our world today. So if a situation was to arise where people were forced, even for a very short amount of time, say weeks or months, to live exactly as their great-grandparents or ancestors lived, they would likely die off in massive numbers in a short amount of time. As an example, when rural electrification was underway during the Depression in the 1930s, if a huge systemic disaster had wiped out the entire electrical system in America for a whole year, there likely would have been 0 deaths that could be directly attributed to the power outage. So our base number is 0. By contrast, a similar unexpected and systemic loss of electrical power across the whole of America today would likely lead to deaths in the millions if the outage were to last for a single year. Industrialism, coupled with modern consumer capitalism, has created generations of non-viable people. People who are unable to survive outside the artificial womb of JIT life. Each generation more non-viable than the one before it. Individuals who cannot and would not survive even the mildest of interruptions in goods or services without massive government outlays and government rescue programs. We need look no further in our history books than at Hurricane Katrina in Louisiana in 2005 to see how absolutely necessary massive government interventions are to the short-term survival of modern man. In every case during the last several decades where massive disasters have been recorded, there has always been, however weak or slow it may appear, an outside source of stability that was ready and able to jump in and provide aid and comfort to support those who are otherwise unable to survive and support themselves. I believe that if tomorrow there were some sort of massive and comprehensive systemic disaster resulting in a loss of JIT goods and services and a loss in available grid electrical power and water, and if that disaster, whether man-made or natural, caused a scenario where the omnipresent paternal government could not or would not be able or willing to send any appreciable aid for a long period of time, that fully half or more of the population of the United States would die in less than a year. So that's 150 million deaths in less than a year, just in the United States. I think this is probably on the conservative side, but just like in Rome, we think we would never fail. So think about it. Like the Romans in 410 AD, they could not conceive that any such thing could ever come to pass, nor could they even begin to quantify the difficulties and realities of what will occur when such a thing does come to pass. If Americans today were forced without warning to live for just 1 year, exactly like their ancestors lived 150 years ago, and for the past 6,000 years before that, the greater part of them would die in a very short amount of time. This is the very definition of a system that is not viable, that is unsustainable. Most modernists are likely to disagree because most modernists do not have any idea what life would be like without the government-sponsored artificial womb that has been created for them and in which they now live. Don't misunderstand me. I do not mean to say that people are unwilling to go to work. If it has proven anything at all, our times has proven that men and women are willing to do all manner of dehumanizing and mind-numbing work, so long as they believe that they are not to ever be made uncomfortable. I'm saying that most modernists are unable to or unwilling to provide and support for their families outside of the comfortable but unsustainable JIT system that has put everyone within it at risk. We are several generations removed from the last generation that had to make it off the land without a safety net or an artificial system which piped in their food, water, electricity, and whatever else was necessary for their survival. Even the term survival, as it is most commonly used today, implies lasting or making it through to a time or place where the artificial womb of government or industry supplied material comfort and safety is in place. Most survival instructions and materials are predicated on the idea that survival means to persevere until help arrives or until normalcy returns, which means that this type of survivalism assumes an eventual return to the crippling and atrophying way of life that put people at risk in the first place. Now, in the short run, there's nothing wrong with this type of survival if it is necessary and if it works. The problem is that so long as we deny that our current system of life and living is unsustainable, we will refuse to move towards a more realistic and honest system of life and living. Today, every person who lives dependently on the system of JIT supply and security of this modern urban culture is in daily peril of that very likely and impending reality where the system itself collapses and is either irreparable or it cannot be restored to its former condition. Everything I'm saying is about decolonizing and defragmenting the corrupted and atrophied industrialized mind and teaching people another way to think. So what does decolonization or decolonize mean? Every colonial power admits that there are certain things that it must accomplish when it colonizes a formerly independent and free people. The colonial power must first convince its new subjects by warfare, punishments, or education, or by whatever means are necessary, that they must change their former way of life and living. It is not enough that the people be forced to act differently, but in the long term, the newly colonized people must be taught to think differently. They must be reprogrammed. Their minds must be decolonized. Remember, a free and independent agrarian people can be conned into dependency and slavery in less than a century. This can only happen if the people are taught to think differently. Colonialism, whether good or bad, is designed to make a people change the way they think and operate so that they can become valuable and beneficial resources to the foreign colonial power. In order to make a successful and thriving agrarian people, accept that industrialism would bring them both prosperity and unity, the minds of the people had to first be subjugated and colonized. There is a long story of how this colonization of the mind came to be, and is a subject that could fill a whole book in itself. But it is inarguable that this colonization of the American mind took place. Okay, that's it for now. Thumbs up if you like this video, and remember, a simple life is a beautiful life.